All right, so you got this rad new pair of powered speakers from Kanto, and you look on the back and, oh my God, why are there so many things? What's going on? You've discovered both the blessing and the curse of powered speakers. Their do-everything nature adds some inherent complexity to them. Still not as complex as an AV receiver.
It's over 9,000!
But there's definitely a lot more going on than, say, a portable Bluetooth speaker. Well, good thing I'm here is I'm going to tell you what each connection is, what type of signal they receive or output, which one you should use in different use cases, and eventually answer the most important question of all, what is the best input? So you got two main things going on, inputs and outputs. An input receives audio from an audio device so that your speakers can do their thing, and an output sends audio somewhere else, and I'll delve into that a bit later. All right, so let's talk about some of the inputs on our U4. This over here is an RCA jack, and this is an RCA cable with a male RCA plug that fits into the jack. RCA generally carries two types of signals. Line level, which is a signal that's pretty loud and ready to roll, and phono, which is pretty quiet and needs to be amplified a bit, otherwise the speaker doesn't get very loud. All modern audio devices output line level. The only exception is turntables, which typically output that quiet phono signal. If that's the case, you just need to flip this little switch so that the phono signal incoming can be boosted internally within the speaker to give you adequate volume. Tuck actually has a dedicated phono input, so no switch flipping is required. If you're using a turntable that also has a ground wire, you're going to want to connect it to the ground jack. This is not an input or an output as it doesn't transmit any audio. It's just there to eliminate any potential buzzing you might get. Don't think about it too much. Just use it if your turntable has a ground post. Otherwise, you can safely ignore it. Next is the aux input, and the connector is a 3.5mm jack, sometimes known as an 1/8" jack or a headphone jack or mini stereo. It's got a lot of names. This is the corresponding cable with its male 3.5mm plug that fits into the jack. 3.5mm cables generally carry line level signals similar to RCA. In fact, both RCA and aux inputs are kindred spirits as they're both analog. They're passing fluctuating voltage to the speaker. The opposite of analog is digital, which is passing data to the speaker, and the speaker's got to figure out how to turn it into audio. I highly encourage you to check out our What is a DAC video, as it covers a bunch of info about the differences between these two different types of signals. You'll also get to see more of this beautiful face. So let's talk about the digital inputs on our speakers, and we'll switch to Tuck for that. Tuck has one optical input instead of two like U4. The connector is a Toslink jack, and here's an optical cable with a male Toslink plug. It's called optical because it's using light to transmit data. It's blinking on and off thousands of times a second to pass the data that the speaker needs to create audio. Optical cables carry SPDIF signals, which can be multi-channel for surround sound, but in our case, it's carrying a 2-channel or stereo signal. You don't really have to worry about what SPDIF is. You can just think of it as the language that the audio device and the speakers use to communicate and pass the data around. To recap, since this one's a bit confusing, this is an optical cable, this is a Toslink connector, and it's carrying a stereo SPDIF signal. Tuck has USB, which U4 does not. The connector that Tuck has is a Type B USB jack, and here's the male Type B plug. You usually see this on printers, so these USB cables are often sold as printer cables. USB carries data over its own proprietary signal called USB audio class. Again, USB audio class is just the language that the computer and the speakers communicate through. And the last digital input is Bluetooth.
It's in the speaker.
Oh, in the speaker. Bluetooth is wireless, so there's no physical connectors or jacks or plugs, and the receiver is actually inside of our speakers. Bluetooth can carry data through a few different signals or codecs, as they're called. Tuck supports AAC, aptX, and aptX HD, with each of those progressively being able to transmit more data, which correlates to higher audio fidelity. That covers the inputs. Let's talk about outputs. So far, we've been sending audio to the speakers. Now we want to send the audio from the speakers to something else. TUC has a subwoofer output on the rear, a single RCA jack. To add a subwoofer to TUC, you'll want to run a single RCA to RCA cable from the speaker's sub out to a powered speaker's RCA input. Single RCA cables are usually sold as subwoofer cables, and if you're buying a Kanto sub, the correct cable will already be in the box. Most powered subwoofers have stereo RCA inputs, right and left, and since there's only one single RCA output on the back of our speakers, you'll want to plug the subwoofer cable into the correct RCA jack. Avoid plugging the cable into any ports labeled LFE. Just plug it into the red or white jack that's labeled left or right. TUC also has a headphone output on the front, and the connector is a 3.5mm jack. Just plug in wired headphones. I ain't got to explain shit. Now there's one more output that I want to talk about, and that's these guys. Binding posts are strictly for connecting speakers to amps. They're not sending your line level, phono, or digital signals. They're sending the full fat wattage to the speakers. It's what we call a high level signal. High level signals are the last leg in the journey that actually pushes power to the speaker to make it sing. One thing to note that may be obvious to some of you but not others is that you can't just plug a different style of cable even if it fits into a jack. Notice how you can plug aux into the RCA? Well, that's wrong. Just because you can plug an N64 cartridge into a toaster doesn't mean you should. Okay, so we covered a lot of ground, and hopefully you're ready for the big reveal. Which input is the best? They're all pretty good. There's no right or wrong answer, as they're all pretty capable of delivering good, clean sound. The only downside of analog inputs like RCA and aux is that they have the ability to pick up noise along the length of the cable. The cables kind of act like antennas. Radio frequencies passing through the air can jostle the electrons inside the cable, and those little variations in electricity can be picked up by the sensitive speaker. Using nicer cables with thicker or better shielding can reduce this effect, but it's only really necessary to upgrade your cables if you can hear hissing or other distortion. If it sounds good to you, don't worry about it too much. Using the digital inputs of our speakers is generally the preferred method. Digital literally cannot pick up noise. The signal is either perfectly represented or it's completely garbled. There's no in between. For that reason, you don't have to buy nice digital cables like you may have to do with analog. So feel free to cheap out on your USB and optical cables, people. Just more money you can put aside for speaker stands. Let's talk about the different audio devices you're likely to connect to our speakers. And I'll go over which input I think you should use and what circumstances may make you choose a different input. We'll start with turntables. Literally every turntable on earth has RCA, so use that. Plug the turntable's RCA output directly into your speaker's dedicated phono input or into the RCA input and flick the switch to phono. Now TVs. Literally every TV on earth has optical, so use that. Plug an optical cable into your TV's Toslink audio output and the speaker's optical input. Remember how I mentioned optical cables can carry surround sound signals? Make sure you set your TV, smart apps, or anything connected to the TV, like video game consoles or cable boxes, to stereo. If you hear garbled static, you know something in the audio chain is still sending a surround signal. Computers and PCs. You're going to want to use a digital connection here if possible. USB if your speakers have it, or optical if you can swing it. Sadly, not many PCs have opticals, so it may be worth seeking out a USB to optical converter. Why go to all this effort to use optical if pretty much every computer has 3.5mm outputs? Because the 3.5mm jacks on most PCs are, how do I put this, complete garbage. They're usually an afterthought, and the last thing you want to hear when your speaker is 2 feet away from your ears is buzzing or hissing. My advice, if you're reluctant to go digital, connect your computer to our speakers through a 3.5mm, and if it sounds good, you're in the clear. If not, go digital, my young Padawan. Mobile devices, phones. The whole point of phones is that they're mobile, so using a wired connection doesn't make a lot of sense. Use Bluetooth. You'll be happy you did. If you rock an iOS device, make sure the speakers you purchase support the AAC codec. Most of our speakers do. AAC is the highest quality codec that iPhones and iPads use. Android phones can support aptX, and higher-end models do aptX HD, and there's no need to change any settings as the speakers will automatically choose the best quality codec when the device connects to it. Smart home. If you want to connect a Google Home to our speakers, you got to use Bluetooth since they literally don't have any wired outputs. On the other hand, some of Amazon's Echo devices have wired outputs, and I would suggest using those with our speakers rather than Bluetooth. Not all of our speakers can automatically wake from Bluetooth, and the whole point of using a smart home device with a speaker is so you can start casting audio to them without having to manually turn them on. Fortunately, all of our speakers can automatically wake up when they're connected through wired inputs, so you'll get a more seamless experience when wired. Now, there's a whole slew of other devices that can connect to our speakers that I haven't mentioned. If you're ever wanting an expert opinion on how you should hook up an audio device to a Kanto speaker, never hesitate to contact our support team or hit us up on social media. If you enjoyed this video, I'm sure you'll love the others on the channel, and make sure to subscribe to never miss another one. I'm Jason from Kanto Audio, and I'll see you in the next video.